before we start, sorry, I remembered we've got to do like omissions and apologies and corrections.
Oh, have we got loads
Um,
of them? Okay.
well, I know of at least one. The
Okay.
place where the Halifax card cash ad was shot was Butler's Wharf, and I apologise to Ben for getting that wrong. It was Butler's Wharf.
Sorry, Ben.
Okay, that's noted. Now we can move on.
Okay, so that's it. We didn't make any more than that, or we may have. They just haven't been pointed out.
I think we made a ton of massive errors, but no one cared about any of them. The
Only
the, the
Ben.
important one, yeah, the
Thanks,
important one is
Ben.
the location of the Halifax card cash ad. That's
Which we said was Wapping and isn't. Did
it's
we say
not
it was Wapping?
Wapping. We said
Yeah.
it was Docklands. I
Yeah.
think we said it was Canary Wharf at one point. Not
Incorrect.
Butler's Wharf.
Butler's.
So let's do Lindsay's question because she was kind
So
enough to send us a question.
yes. Which was why don't really good organizations stay like that beyond a brief moment in time? And are there any counterexamples? Which is a great question.
It is a good question. What was your initial? Did you think basically that was a true notion
I
instantly on hearing
I
that?
I think it's really true. I think it's really hard. It appears to be, and it's certainly my experience of being part of various organizations. I think it's really hard to stay consistently good. I think lots of companies have been good in one or several ways for a bit, but very few have been known as good or even great for a really long span of time. You could say what a really long is, but let's say more than, well, we should talk about it, but like more than 5 years, like a meaningful period of time, I think. And I guess the question is why. I thought about organizations that actually you've been part of that were known as being really good for something, because I think there are case studies that certainly in the UK are recognized. So Wyden for a while, and still to a certain extent, but I would argue not as much anymore, was known as a top creative shop in London for multiple decades. It just was. Also, obviously, a force to be reckoned with in Portland, but just something that I have heard less about. Bulb was a good energy company and an interesting and much discussed organization to work within and be a part of. Good, debatable, but certainly under a lot of scrutiny for a handful of years. And then GDS, I think, should be talked about as well. Really good for just fixing a part of the internet that a lot of people in this country had thought a lot about for the wrong reasons, and then they started to think about it for the right reasons. So those were three. And is the common fact to you? Amazing. Discuss. Um, I wondered. We don't have to talk about them all in forensic detail, but
Mhm.
I was going to make some noddy points, and then essentially you could knock them down. Like the obvious point is people. The people make the organization. It's probably not called out as much as it should be because people always go to product first. And yes, arguably, if you've just got lots of nice people in a room doing busy work without a product, it's also meaningless. But you can have a fantastic product. And let's take, for example, like Monzo and Revolut, great products at a time when the financial industries were ripe for disruption, arguably. Are they known or were they recognized at a time when they started to grow as being really good organizations? I think they were known as having really good products, and then they recruited really good people and they didn't stay good. I think they didn't hold on to those good people for very long. Maybe some of them have. Most of this is anecdotal.
Mhm.
But I would say that organizations are the people because the culture is so important, and it is still seen as a one and done thing where you get pizza or yoga or ping pong, and you say we've sorted it. But we all know that it isn't because it's hard and it's expensive. And that's a boring thing to say, that you have to keep on investing in people and keep on doing it in order to retain the talent that makes the organization. So boring noddy point to be acknowledged, arguably.
That's interesting. I was going to say, I think you have also worked with. Well, I think there's a thing going on that startups have a disproportionate influence on the sort of conversation around goodness, and they are weird, and they're not typical of anything. It's a bit like saying, "Can you have a good mayfly?" It's like, how would you know? It wasn't around very long. It didn't do
Yeah.
anything. Whereas Unilever, Burnett, Kellogg's, that like there's things wrong with Unilever, but also they've clearly been big and successful for a long time. It slightly depends what you mean by good. If you mean, raised billions of pounds, managed to stay alive for 5 years, that's different to, something else. And I mean, and agencies slightly similarly, right? They are also mayflies, for the most part, and some of them have a good run of X years, but you know, I don't know, Sony, LVMH. These are good things that have lasted a long time, and you know that that's arguably in some ways I think a harder thing than can you be like world class for two Super Bowl ads.
Yeah.
That's
Which
something
is
else.
why I think 5 years is the absolute bare minimum that you can be good for, and then that's still called a good organization, because not anybody, but like it's easier to be really good for a short amount of time. And especially at a certain size, like 20, 40 people can be obviously really good in a room. When you get to a certain scale and then you sustain it, that's much more impressive. Obviously, and
Yeah,
it's way, way harder, as you experienced at Bulb. As soon as it hit, from my experience at the outside looking in anyway, as soon as it hit the 1,000 mark in terms of employees, it became, it looked like it felt uncontrollable in terms of like not everybody in the same building knew each other's names, so the culture was more difficult.
yeah.
There was,
I think there's a. Sorry, go on.
no, so like the
Go on.
amount of press and attention and scrutiny almost became like a self-sustaining thing. Like it was just always being talked about, and obviously they only ran with some stories when there was a million other things going on, because that many people in a building generate that many things going on, but the same three things were talked about. Very hard to break that loop.
I think there's a thing as well that I mean, again, it's part. Maybe it's part of the. It's quite. I think it's quite good to be a successful small thing. It's. I think once you become a big thing, you're either a good big thing or a bad big thing, and like that's it forever. And actually, once you are a big thing, you just keep going broadly. Like
Yeah.
after up to a certain scale and a certain age, it's relatively unusual for anything dramatic to happen. It's the bit in the middle that is like the transition from small to big that's really hard. And the thing I remember at Bulb, and actually to some extent GDS as well, is when you go, because you at some point you go from being a small organisation with the systems and processes of a small organisation to either a small organisation with the systems and processes of a large organisation as you transition, and that's horrible. Like you're really small, but you've got a huge PR operation or a huge HR operation, and you've got all these cloying, deadening systems, or you're a large organisation with the systems and processes of a small one, and that's like chaotic and nothing works and you can't make anything happen and all that. It's like that phase shift from small to big is the really hard bit, and might be some of what Lindsay's getting at, which is like, because I suspect some of her premises, like scale ups or startups or something, is like how do you? It's quite easy to be good when you're small, but how do you stay good as you get big? that's
Yeah.
that's really hard, right?
I mean,
Because there
adolescence.
tends to be. Sorry, go on.
No, sorry. No, like adolescence, like growing pains, like it's definitely applicable to companies and the people who were good at getting it off the ground. Like, and I remember this with Bulb, like some of the people who were amazing when it was tiny, did they have the skill set when it reached a certain scale? Like, could anyone have planned for that? And there were some people that just did, and there were some people who turned around and went, I don't, and there were some people who had to turn around and tell them, I'm not sure you do. I'm not sure this is gonna work. That's really hard if they're employee number like 5, and then you get to 250 and you're like, yeah, I'm not sure that the role it's either and you're asking them to change arguably what they were really good at, and you can't really say to them actually go off and do that somewhere else and make another small thing work because it's
Yeah,
booting them out of the thing that they feel they are like a parent for or an owner of, and they literally do own a bit of it in most cases. That's really difficult.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
There's something as well about it's just seen this in agencies. It's like talent density. It's like if you've got 50 people and 20 of them are really good, then you've got a really good organization. But if you've got 500 people, there's no way 200 of them are going to be really good. Like, the proportions just you can't recruit 200 really good people into a 500. So the proportions change. So you then kind of you have to operate a different type of model, and some of what you design has to be like, can we sort of break? I think the thing that happens is you end up with good teams inside okay organizations, or differently good organisations. Because arguably the British civil service, for all its critics, is really good, but it wasn't really good at the stuff that GDS had to do. So there was that was a subset that was good at a particular thing, but it wouldn't have been possible without the superstructure of all the other stuff that had come before, and all that kind of thing. But
And the civil services are particularly interesting because obviously you could argue that the same could happen in reverse. You get a massive, overpeopled, arguably bloated and dysfunctional organization. And if you trim the right fat, and obviously this is what consultants are overpaid to do, you make it lean and efficient again. Well, whoever was in charge of doing that with the civil service went too far, sacked the wrong people, and just caused utter disarray. So all the experts in every single function of government were just gone.
yeah,
And I don't know,
yeah,
which group of people thought that was a good idea, but they did not trim it down to the essentials and make it a lean, mean, bureaucratic machine. They just broke it. They took expertise out of government very, very rapidly. Part of the reason why we're in such a pickle, arguably.
pickle is a well chosen word. The I'm trying to think of another way of talking about this that might be interesting. The because it's I do think there is a thing that beyond a certain scale and a certain age, organisations are large. Like the hardest thing you can do is to get something to change. Like to just get an organisation to change. And if it's good, if it got to that scale and it's good, it's actually quite easy for it to stay good. It's relatively easy for it to stay good, and because the culture sort of reinforces. And I remember doing a presentation for Unilever after I left Nike, where they essentially said was like they essentially the question they were asking is like, how do we do good ads like Nike does? And I think I must have told you this story, and I was like, well, I can tell you, but you won't do it. And the answer was basically stop pre-testing and
I
wait
was
for
going to
20
say, yeah,
years.
it's definitely the pre-testing conversation. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and they were like, yeah, you're right, we won't do that. And but it's the wait for 20 years that's the important bit. It's like just stopping pre-testing just puts you in free fall. Like you need another way of deciding how you're going to do stuff. And Nike had a culture, or developed a culture, where they trusted their own instinct. They trusted their own, but which is really easy for an individual powerful person to do, it's very hard for a corporate culture to develop that, and that takes time and a lot of trust and a lot of luck and a lot of circumstances, and that's you know
It's
I
really
remember once. All gone. Sorry,
no. Finish.
but I the story that means the most to me about this is I didn't when I was in Portland, I didn't do that much on Nike. I just sort of saw it occasionally, and because that I was in a phase where I was like the planner on Microsoft, and Nike kind of thought, do we want planning? Maybe we want planning. Let's see. Let's sometimes have a planner in a meeting and see, see if they're good. And so I sat in the odd meeting, and most of which went completely over my head. They were all talking about, gridiron and quarterbacks. And but we were in this one meeting, and they'd hired I think a new CMO, and they'd come from, I want to say, the Gap, I think, and they'd brought with them like a data person, and they came into this meeting. There was some Nike, those the old school Nike ad people from Nike, some Wieden Kennedy people, and then this new CMO. And she kind of went, right, it's clear from the data, I've done a lot of analysis, it's clear from the data that what we have to do is abandon youth and kind of grow old with our audience. Like the people who grew up loving Nike, they now want to wear chinos and that kind of stuff. And we need to super serve that market and kind of do that. So we need to move away from this obsession with youth and hip hop and, African American culture and football and sport. And, that's the massive business opportunity that we should pursue. So you people need to start thinking about all that kind of stuff, and we were kind of the agency who, okay, we could do that, and then she left, and the Nike ad manager stayed behind. It was a long time sort of Nike person, and we were like, what's going on there? Is that sounds really radical? Are you okay? Like, is your job going to be all right? And he just said, yeah, don't worry, we're not going to do any of that. And it was just like, he was like, yeah, she'll be gone in 6 months. And it was just like, the culture will reject her. Like that will not happen. The culture is too powerful. That will not happen, for right or wrong. Like he said, I mean, she might have a point, but we are not going to do that. That is not what this company does. And he was right.
Wow.
And I was
That
really struck by, because that works both ways, right? Like she
yeah.
could have had the answer. She could have been the person turning up at Kodak saying we need to get into digital, you know.
Mm.
But he just sort of had the honesty to go, yeah, it's not going to happen. It's not what we do.
That's incredibly impressive because I feel like I would be really, I would love to work for an organization that had that level of conviction now, even almost even if it's the wrong way, just because
Yeah,
it
yeah,
feels like, and obviously there's many more accomplished podcasts who talk about this in terms of promotion cycles, meaning it's very, very difficult to get an agency client relationship locked in and sustained over a period of number of years so you can build the brand and and do all of that shit. Um, and the idea, like it feels like every 6 months there is somebody who comes in, and it's never radical, unfortunately. It's just against the thing that you've been trying to do for the previous 6 months. So you're like, okay, we unpick all of that and we do all of this, and it's just there's no option to say no, and there's certainly nobody on the client side who goes, belay that command. Because I know that our organization will not push it through. It's always the opposite. It's always sea change, this is happening. It's never quite done properly. It's never quite followed through or whatever. And it's like 6 months of just swirl. It's just swirl. Nothing ever really comes of it. And it burns people out, obviously. It frustrates people. It doesn't build anything good. So I sort of would love that. The idea of even if it's radical in the wrong way, just the idea of being like, we're doing this and everybody just
yeah.
staying the
Yeah.
course.
But
That's cool.
I think the thing that made it effective is the sort of the bit. the Nike bit of staying the course was also constant reinvention kind of thing. It wasn't just,
Yeah, nice work if you
you
can
know,
get it.
so yeah, I mean, it was again, we did a thing called Run London, which was like the sort of basically the first time a brand had organised a 10K. Like had had invented like activation. We didn't know it was called activation then, but it was, rather than doing some ads, we're going to do a 10K. And it was called Run London, and it went really well, and blah blah blah. And I remember talking to the local UK Nike marketing director after we'd done it, and he said, right, well, we need to start thinking about next year. And because I'd grown up in other agencies and proper marketing businesses, and I was like, well, we'll just do that again, won't we? Like it went really well. Shouldn't we just do that again? And he kind of said, no, if we just do the same thing again, I will get fired. It's like we what we have to do is something completely different every year. That's that's how you get promoted. And again, that's just an unusual culture, right? That's a culture that I don't think anyone decided, but a bunch of people came together and decisions were made, and it became the culture where
Yeah.
people who were reasonably talented, but not stellar talent compared to anyone else, inside a culture that says, yeah, you have to do something different every year. That's
It,
that's really
it
hard.
it is really hard, I guess, and it was the one other thing I guess I sort of had on this topic, which is like um there's loads of reasons why a company can stop being good, I guess. Like in the case of there could be an energy crisis or a Deus Ex Machina or like whatever. Um, but complacency feels like it's a consistent killer, um, because it's really, really hard for everybody to sustain a certain level of hard work for ages. You meet very occasionally people who are incredibly good at sustaining that level of work for a lifetime, and they're really fed by it, and it doesn't seem to eat them up to do it, and they're vanishingly small. Like the team who like founded Adam and Eve and then NCA, and now like they genuinely seem to run on advertising. Like, and they're not, they're not surviving on blood transfusions. Like they just do it, and they're never.
Yeah.
No one would call that group of people complacent ever. Um, but I think it's kind of human to do a really hard thing and then kind of sit back a bit. And as soon as you do that, there is a risk of shit backsliding and people not doing the work and the quality of the creative slipping. And I guess Nike sound wildly frustrating in some ways, but if it's baked into the culture of your organization that you have to keep on reinventing the wheel, no one's going to become complacent. Is everyone going to get ADHD and burn out? Maybe,
Yeah, yeah.
but
And there were
but you're
bits
not.
of that culture that were
Yeah,
definitely unpleasant and
yeah,
over aggressive but a lot of it I've increasingly I think your thing about my version of your complacency point, which I completely agree with, is broadly it's like entropy.
yeah,
It's just if you have an organization, it slowly gets worse. Now it might be getting worse from a very high bar, in which case, it slowly gets worse from a high bar, and that's okay. And that all mostly what leadership is injecting energy to
mm,
counter that entropy. And sometimes, and like if it's positive, optimistic energy, that's a different culture than if it's like angry, you're all idiots energy. But ultimately, you need energy because otherwise it is just entropy, and everyone slightly does worse than they did the year before and all that kind of stuff. But that injecting that energy is a can be a personal toll on people. Um, you know,
yeah. I mean, is it a really unusual person or group of people who can be like create an organization, have their identity tied up with the success of it, and continue to feed it with energy and feed the people within it, and turn up consistently, optimistic, pumping energy in, putting their time in, um, without fucking their lives up irrevocably, and doing that for
yeah,
years, and
yeah, yeah,
then and then what when you get to a point where you're like, no, I need to stop working now, or I've had another idea. What you find a magic group of people or a legacy plan who are going to do exactly the same thing and represent to people something similar, if not identical, that mean you take it into the next generation. It just feels, when you say it like that, absolute pie in the sky. But people have done it consistently, not
Yeah,
with
yeah,
family
and
members. They've found these
that's
people.
that's why I think like second or third generation leadership is so much more interesting and impressive. Like
Yeah.
if when it's done well, it's like you weren't even the founder because you can't even tell those stories. You know, it's like you're the third person to come and like try and inject some energy into this thing, and no one likes you because you arrived from outside, and like that's really hard to do that,
Yeah.
and then multiple generations of that, and then very occasionally members of the same family of that, like that's that's where it gets really interesting.
I don't feel that's acknowledged enough, actually. Maybe it's not considered a sufficiently like sexy headline. I don't know, but that,
Well, I
yeah.
remember at Microsoft, everyone takes the piss out of him, but like Steve Ballmer, the amount of energy he injected into Microsoft. I mean, he was around a bit at the beginning, but like after Bill Gates, when he took over, I mean, he was a ludicrous figure in many ways, but people at Microsoft loved him, and he injected energy and he bounced it along, And then you look at, yeah, yeah, I mean, that's a hard job to not be the person who started it and to try and keep it going. That's a hard thing.
So the answer to your question, Lindsay, is not an easy one, but
Yeah, we don't know,
yeah,
basically.
we don't know.
Should
We
we
don't
just
know.
say don't know?
Yeah,
Yeah,
don't know,
yeah,
Lindsay. Um,
yeah.
ready for the next question?
Yeah, let's do it.